Notice anything different? So last time we talked about value and pricing, but your price is only one element in making money. Having a great idea, making something emotional, solving customer problems are great, but by themselves they won't pay your salary. At the end of the day, the business objective is to make money. So we're going to talk about company profit, product profit, and time. So what is profit? Profit very simply is just money in minus money out. So if you think about this in terms of yourself, your money in is your salary. Your money out can be things that happen very regularly, like the tax you pay, your rent or mortgage, utilities, insurance, food. Or it can be one-off payments, vacation, clothes, anything that you buy. And if your salary is more than all of those outgoings, then you have some profit. And maybe you'll put that in savings or investments. And it's much the same with a company, and you can see that through the corporate financial statement. And these are available online for any investor, and they have to be declared to the government. So you can see on a corporate financial statement, usually at the top, there's maybe number of units sold or at least revenue. So revenue is the money coming in from selling things. And that really means if it's a car, that's the money that you as a private customer are paying to your dealer, minus some bits and pieces that's coming in. Then there's the gross profit. That's the profit from selling that thing or service. Then there's the operational profit or operational income. That's the profit from selling the thing, but then also including the costs of running the business, the rent, employee salaries who aren't related to the producing that product or service. And at the bottom line, the final profit is the net income or net profit. And that really is after tax, after all financial adjustments, that really is how much money the company is making. This, I'm not covering here EBIT or free cash flow, which are incredibly important if you're running a company or if you're investing, but they're kind of outside the scope of what we're talking about here. So if we have a look at one specific example, so this is Tesla 2021. So most companies will have several different revenue streams. So maybe different, for a car company, different cars they're selling, or maybe they have different businesses, in this case, energy production and carbon credits. So you add up all of those revenue streams, and that comes to a total revenue of the company, how much money is coming into the company. Then you subtract away the cost of making all of those things. So this is the direct cost, usually what's called the cost of sales or total delivered cost, that's related to those objects. And what you have left after that is the gross profit. That's the first profit figure. So then if you subtract away all of, like I said, the rent, the employee salaries for everyone who isn't directly related to producing a product or service, HR and things like that, then that's the operational profit. And then if you subtract away lots of financial adjustments and tax and investments and things like that, then you get the net profit, really how much the company gets. So we can have a look at several different companies and compare how they match up. So in this case, we have 2020 calendar year, and we have Ford, Tesla, Volkswagen, and Alphabet, who are Google's parent company. So here we have total, per unit, and marginal. So sometimes in different items, it's interesting to look at different ways of analyzing the data. So per unit is literally, you take the total company's profit or revenue and you divide it by the number of things they've sold. And marginal is that profit compared to the revenue. So this is really interesting because you can see interesting things from your competitors. So the strengths and weaknesses of Volkswagen versus Ford versus Tesla's business models. And for example, Google's tax plan, the difference between operational profit and net income. But also, we spoke earlier about how it's really important to understand your customers, and your management of your company are your customers too. So if your company is doing badly in one area, they probably won't approve a new product in that area. If the company's doing well, they might be willing to take more interesting risks as an experiment. And what you want is the resources to get your product built. So you need to understand your customer, in this case the management's mindset and motivations. So now we're going to talk about the profit for your product. So first of all, we have to start with revenue, and revenue isn't price. Revenue and turnover are almost the same thing. So one thing that we often talk about is wholesale turnover, and that reflects the journey that a product makes from your factory to your customer. So you produce it in your factory, you transport that product to a retailer, and then the retailer sells that on to the customer, and the government takes a chunk in tax. So this is with a physical product. Obviously with software it's a bit different, but so wholesale turnover is the price, the MSRP, manufacturer suggested retail price, minus the tax, usually VAT, 20% average in Europe, minus the distribution charges, the shipping charge of getting it to your retailer, and minus the retailer fee, which is usually a percentage. The net revenue is that wholesale turnover minus any discounts that you want to apply, sales and things like that. So we can look at that in this situation from now on. We're going to use a hypothetical example of a $30,000 or euro or pound car. So that's kind of average for certainly the European marketplace. So we can see if it's $30,000 MSRP, then we can take away the 20% VAT, we can take away a small distribution charge, we can take away the percentage fee that the dealer or the retailer is making, and what you got left is the wholesale turnover. That's the first revenue. And in this case, you can see that the dealer is on a $30,000 car is probably only making about $3,000. Then we have to take into consideration any planned discounts or sales or incentives, and that leaves you with the net revenue. And we can also consider different industries, for example, restaurants or software. So here you have no transport costs and no dealer costs. So naturally your wholesale turnover and your net revenue are higher. So far, up until this point, everything that we've done, so we talked about innovation, we talked about customer research, we talked about understanding the market and the positioning, the pricing, all of that has been pretty low cost. It's basically just your time doing the research, thinking of ideas, building a concept and a product and pricing structure. But what you're going to do after this step is kicking off engineering, production, and marketing. And those are three really big cost centers in most organizations. So you're going to be committing significant company resources to developing your product. And so you want to make sure that's a good idea, and for sure your management want to make sure that's a good idea, which is why it's worth building a realistic business case first, understanding really how much profit you're going to make from this point on. So there's two types of costs. There's variable cost, and that's cost per object. So that's parts, labor, support for service, any consumables. It's really the direct things which go into making and supplying that object. So again, in our $30,000 euro car case, we can see that the variable cost is coming directly from making that product, all the raw materials and components and labor from building the car. And every extra car you make will carry that cost again. So you can see here in this situation, in this case it's about 80%, so 70 to 80% of the wholesale turnover of the car is that cost, is that variable cost. So that's somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 or euros. It's a huge amount. And if you think that minimum amount can't really be massively reduced, that's why small cars like city cars really struggle to make money at all, because that variable cost doesn't change a huge amount depending on the size of the car. So you subtract away that variable cost from the net revenue, and then what you get is the marginal profit. So that's really the profit each car is making, and you want to make sure that's always positive. You never want to be selling a car, or ideally never want to be selling a car or product or service where marginally you're not making money. In this case, it's about, in our example, it's about 10% of the wholesale turnover. And we reflect that as a percentage of wholesale turnover or as a physical amount. So in this case, about 2,000 euros. So a great way of improving your profit is to reduce your variable cost. Has a direct impact on how much profit you're making. And if we go back to those other examples of the restaurant and software, so the variable cost for a restaurant is probably pretty big, all the ingredients and things. But the variable cost for software is almost nothing. So the marginal profit from a software company is huge compared to any of the physical industries. The other type of cost is a fixed cost, what's called an overhead. So this is things which it doesn't change depending on how many of the product or service you're selling. So there's things like advertising, designing, testing, tooling and equipment. So in our hypothetical situation, you share that cost across the number of items you'll make. So selling more products or more services, you're effectively reducing the amount of that fixed cost per car or per product, per service. So because it's huge numbers, millions, but distributed across hundreds of thousands, the number doesn't look so big when you look at it on a per unit basis. So in this case, if we subtract away those fixed costs, then we end up with an operational profit. So in reality, if you think that this journey that we've gone on so far, we started with a 30,000 euro or dollar car to the customer. The dealer's maybe making 3,000, but the company is only making 1,000 to 2,000 at the end of the day. So if we go back to our other examples of restaurant and software, the restaurant has quite big overheads, quite big fixed costs for things like the payment of the chefs and the waiters and things. So you can see that many restaurants go out of business. They struggle to make a profit. By comparison, software companies, yes, they have to pay some engineers to do the coding, but remember that the development cycles are quite short. And also there's no other massive investment in terms of hardware. There's no tooling, there's no physical thing that most software companies have to buy. So software companies can make huge operating profits. But it's not quite that simple. You can't just look at it like this. You have to consider the impacts of time. So we've got to remember that we've been talking about this hypothetical product as something which happens immediately. We've been talking about one example of a $30,000 or euro car that you're selling in one moment, but actually you're selling a large volume of these over a period of time. And so you have to understand the business case in the context of the whole life cycle of your product. So at the beginning, you have to put some effort in, some investment, and later on, you'll sell some and you'll get some money back, some return on investment, ROI. And when you make those sales, you're not going to sell everything immediately. You'll probably keep selling it for years. And during those years, you'll probably have to make improvements. So you have to do additional investment and the sales will go up and down. So you can make a very simple spreadsheet to look at this. And that's what you should do when you're building your product and building your business case. So in our example of our hypothetical car, we can say maybe it has 3 years of development, 4 years of development, 5 years, 6 years of development, but there's a number of years of development where you're just investing and you're not getting anything back. Then we can say that we have on average 100,000 cars a year we're going to sell, but that's not 100,000 cars every year. That's more in some years, less in other years. Usually towards the end of life, as the product ages, it tails off. If you make some changes, it boosts it back up again. But remember, that is directly related to your revenue, and that's directly related to your marginal profit. So then you need to look at your costs and see how your costs are distributed. So your fixed costs, probably at the very beginning, it's just you working on it, as we said, and you're not so expensive, to be honest. But then after you've got your business case approved, you're going to get engineering involved, and just before you launch the product, you're going to get marketing involved, and there's going to be huge communication costs of things like making videos, maybe buying advertising space, doing physical press launches and things like this. And then there's little costs of refreshing the product and doing quality improvements and feature improvements throughout the life. Then on top of that, you've got the per unit cost, the TDC. So the more you sell, the more that cost is. So then that goes up and down with your sales volume, and you can stack those all together and then you get total cost per year. And if you compare that total cost per year with your total revenue, you can see how the profit shakes out. So you can see that, for example, in our hypothetical case, we don't make any money until the third year of sales. So this is really important for high investment physical products, that they need a long time to recoup that investment. Time is money, that's a common saying, but what if instead I just put all of that investment money in a savings account in the bank? Because of interest and inflation, money is worth more now than in the future, and this is what's known as the time value of money. So if we put all of those investments, all of that fixed cost and variable cost in a bank, and we look every year with an amount of interest, we can look at the end of our life cycle and we can figure out how much we're going to have in the bank. That's called the net present value. That amount of money we would have in the future if we'd invested it. It's not actually net present value, there's a different formula for that, but this is a good way of thinking about it. If we compare that to the amount of revenue that we're going to make, the amount of profit that we're going to make actually every year, then if the amount of profit we're going to make at the end of it is higher than if we just put it in the bank and earned interest, then that's a positive business case. That goes ahead. If it's not, then it's what's called the do nothing scenario, which is just put it in the bank and we don't invest in this product. So the good news for our hypothetical business case is that it's positive, it's about 670 million euros, and we should go ahead. But even under that situation where it's positive, this assumes a future interest rate that's stable, no financial crisis, a market that's stable, a very predictable amount of sales, and a currency exchange that's stable. So Forex, foreign currency exchange, is really important when you've got suppliers in different countries, you're selling in different countries. Those currency rates are always changing, and that can have a huge impact on your profit. Also, even if the NPV is really borderline, it's still probably better to make a product and get it out there. Because if you don't make that product, if you just put all that money in the bank, you're still paying all of your engineers and all of your marketing people, all your production staff, you still have the factories, you still have all the dealers, and they need something to do. If you don't have a better plan of what to do, you need to get something out there to put into your dealerships, into your retailers, to get out there with customers, to keep your brand alive, to keep everyone occupied, to keep everyone in jobs. So you can, like I said, put all this in a big spreadsheet. The math's really simple. The terminology is confusing, but the math's really simple. And you can just take 10% off of everything and just look one by one at how you can improve profit. So, for example, I've done that for our hypothetical business case, and you can see that, if you put 10% on the price, that's $3,000 or 3,000 euros, that's a significant amount for the customer. You might drive a bunch of customers away, and you're only going to make a few hundred on your profit at the end of the day. So that's not a great idea. Some of the other items are very small impact, like your dealer margin and things like that, your transport. But the really, really big one is your variable cost. If you take 10% off your variable cost, it has thousands of impact on your bottom line. And that's why particularly physical engineering product-based companies have huge teams constantly involved in reducing the variable cost of the products that they're making without impacting the product to the customer. So they can keep the price, but they can reduce that variable cost, and it makes a huge difference to the business case. It's really effective. But you can look at this sort of table and you can consider some companies like Tesla, who notoriously don't give discounts, and they try where possible to direct sell or control their dealerships. And so they're reducing their costs up at that front end of the value stack. Or any software company who their variable costs, the retailing and all those sorts of things are much, much, much lower than any physical products. So obviously they're making much more operational profit. But also you can look at those fixed costs as well. That was all variable items, but if you look at the fixed costs, you could reduce your investment, so try and just cut your marketing budget or cut your engineering budget. It doesn't have a huge impact, to be honest. It's about the same as adjusting your price by 10%, but it's a big money of investment, so maybe that's important for cash flow. You can try and crush your lead time down, so reduce the amount of time your engineers and your marketing people are working up front. Doesn't have a huge impact again in our case, but more effective is to try and sell for longer. So you'll see some companies just try to keep selling the same product for years and years because they've already paid off all their investments. So every one they're selling is making more money. The downside of that is having old products in the marketplace usually doesn't look good for your brand, doesn't look great for your customer, and you're going to be continuously losing market share. But again, you should do this for your product. As a product manager, you're not necessarily responsible for the financials of the product, but you need to build a compelling business case. Like I said, the upper management is your customer. You need to give them something that they'll find attractive. And that will help get your product built, get your product out in the market. So in the next video, we're going to talk about managing the development process, which is project management. Thanks.